I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation.
One nation? The reality is America has always shown to be at least two, one black, one white. It was literally built that way.
We built institutions so that they assisted and supported the well-being and success and lives of some, and we built them so that they destroyed and displaced the lives of others.
Lives destroyed and lives lost, like that of Cynthia Wiggins.
It's racism, and that's what caused her death.
A black woman killed by a deliberate connection many of us may not even realize how deep it goes. But we will learn today from author, educator, and activist, civil rights attorney Deborah Archer. She goes in eye-opening details in Blackland.
And now,
as a brown person, you just feel so invisible.
That's not fiction. Where we're from.
Brothers and sisters, I welcome you to this joyful day.
We celebrate freedom. Where we are.
Get on the ground!
I know someone heard something.
And where we're going.
We the people means all the people.
The Black Information Network presents Blackland with your host, Vanessa Tyler.
Look around. Is your neighborhood one of those with racism rooted in the blueprint? We all know about redlining, but Deborah Archer wrote the book about how city and town planners got around segregation laws with highways and transportation.
And so as the judicial decisions and civil rights laws of the 1950s and 1960s made it more difficult to isolate Black communities using zoning laws and other regulations, we saw urban planners turn to road construction and highway construction in order to impose the segregation that they couldn't count on the law to enforce anymore.
Deborah Archer's book, Dividing Lines, How Transportation Infrastructure Reinforces Racial Inequality.
I would like to say that Dividing Lines helps us understand the history of civil rights. As the civil rights movement began to win victories and segregationists could no longer consistently rely on the law to enforce racial hierarchy, communities around the country began to rely on transportation infrastructure, highways, public transportation, roads, even sidewalks, to do the work of oppression that they could no longer depend on the law to do. When I was writing the book and told people about it, a common reply was for people to mention The Power Broker, that incredibly and insanely popular book about Robert Moses. And in many ways, this is the other side of The Power Broker. The Power Broker is about what Robert Moses did to build and shape New York and his philosophy of development, really disregarding Black and brown communities in order to build highways and parks and community institutions. So Dividing Lines tells the stories of the people impacted by that philosophy, the impact on their lives and their community.
When you think about even Central Park, which was at one point a Black community, which was then condemned, as you mentioned earlier, made to seem, first not built up, then condemned, then taken over.
That's right.
To put a park in. It happens all over.
And it happens at, there's a story to tell about the way that Robert Moses did that with Lincoln Center in New York City as well. It's important for us to understand this history and not think that Black communities have these conditions because of the community, the people who live in those communities, or because it's natural. That's just the way things are. We built our communities this way. We built institutions so that they assisted and supported the well-being and success and lives of some. And we built them so that they destroyed and displaced the lives of others. There's a long history, particularly in the United States, around displacement as a tool of racial oppression, denying people a sense of self by denying them a sense of place.
The deep, dark history of Black communities being displaced when America built its highways. White man's roads through Black men's homes turned out to be the way to go.
That phrase, white men's roads through Black men's homes, was the rallying cry for a community in Washington, D.C. that was fighting a highway that was planned to be built through the community and would have destroyed their community. The idea of using transportation infrastructure to reinforce and lock in racial inequality is something that I explore in my book, Dividing Lines. When we expand our understanding of government-sponsored segregation beyond racial covenants and redlining, it's clear that it's not just the invisible lines created by local, state, and federal laws that divide us. It's also the physical, literal lines that run through and around our communities. And that's transportation. They may seem innocuous. It may seem just merely practical or necessary or natural, but that part of the architecture of racial inequality is real. The nation's transportation system is really an essential element of that infrastructure of inequality that helps to keep communities divided and separate, that keeps communities unequal. And when we're talking about civil rights and racial justice, I think it's important that we have real and meaningful conversations about where we are and exactly how we got there. And I think this conversation around infrastructure, and even more broadly, that the way that we've used infrastructure as a tool to segregate is something that has been missing from the conversation.
The buses and trains were a part of it, whether walking a mile for a bus or no bus at all.
We hear a lot about what's called transportation deserts, and that's the term for the kind of communities that you're describing, where the supply of mass public transportation doesn't meet the demand. And even as parts of the country really continues to invest in highways and suburban commuter rail systems, we still have transportation deserts, and most of those are in Black communities that have been ignored and left out. So when Black neighborhoods were destroyed to make way for highways and roads and urban renewal projects, the people who lived there found themselves scattered in these transportation deserts. And this made, as you said, everyday life really infinitely more challenging. Residents of these communities, again, largely Black communities, have a hard time getting to work and school, going shopping for groceries or clothes, getting to the movies or the park, or seeing the doctor or the dentist, or visiting family. And they may find themselves walking long distances on unsafe streets, really forced to literally risk their lives. And white communities can become transportation deserts too. And as I talk about in the book, Dividing Lines, some residents of those communities actually fight for that outcome. They want to limit public transportation in order to keep Black and low-income people from coming to merely traveling through their neighborhoods.
The trouble to travel, racist, inconvenient, deadly.
One of the stories I tell in the book is about racial stigma that's attached to bus riding. And I learned about the death of a 17-year-old Black woman named Cynthia Wiggins in Buffalo, New York. And Cynthia worked at a fast food restaurant that was in an upscale suburban mall. And to get to the mall from the nearest bus stop, Cynthia had to kind of sprint across 7 lanes of roadway because the mall barred city buses that were used primarily by Black commuters from driving into the parking lot. But they let other buses in, suburban commuter and tourist buses that both had greater white ridership. They were permitted to enter the parking lot. And one day, Cynthia made that run from the bus stop to the mall, and she was crushed by a dump truck.
Cynthia Wiggins, the teenage single mom killed in 1996. Back in the late 1990s, ABC's Nightline did a story on this very issue of transportation racism and talked with those who knew and loved her.
And Cynthia's story is, of course, an extreme version of what I think is an all too common story. Black people needing access to jobs and opportunities that are located in white communities manipulating public transportation policies to exclude them, or Black folks not being able to access public transportation at all within their communities.
Now that we are rebuilding America, what's the likelihood of that those wrongs will now be made right, meaning communities will be reunited that were separated by, let's say, a highway or something like that?
We've certainly started to have what I think is an important conversation about the role that highways and transportation infrastructure played in dividing communities, and the need to rebuild and to bring those communities back together. But as they say, it's hard to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It's a harder process than we would like to believe. It is not just about tearing a highway down. And it's not just about an infusion of economic investment into that community. We really have to do the work to reverse the decades of compounded inequality that comes from having a highway destroy your homes, your churches, and the businesses in your community. We have to figure out how we can invest in homeowners and renters and business owners in those communities over the long term so that the economic investment doesn't lead to displacement. And we have to figure out a way to change policy as we engage in building new infrastructure. Black homes, Black businesses, and Black communities still continue to be valued less than other homes and communities. They stand in the pathways of bulldozers again. And we can actually re-injure those communities and do more harm if we don't go about rebuilding and reconnecting in a way that acknowledges the history of harm, the current harm, and the potential for future harm. One reason why transportation infrastructure has proven to be such an important tool in white supremacy is that removing a physical barrier can be even harder than changing a segregationist law. And these efforts really kicked into high gear when the court signaled the fall of segregation with Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And then the Interstate Highway Act, which was passed in 1956, became this tool that governors and mayors and city planners were using to fight back. So in the wake of Brown, government officials demonstrated the extreme methods that they would go to resist change. And right at that moment, the interstate highway system was being built. And so we see that the interstate highway system just destroyed hundreds of thousands of homes. In one estimate, the United States Department of Transportation estimated that more than 475,000 homes and more than 1 million people were displaced nationwide as a direct result of the original construction of the highways. And those households and those people were disproportionately Black and poor. And in Dividing Lines, I talk about Birmingham, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia, and Indianapolis, Indiana, which all provide powerful examples of how the highway became a tool of a post-Jim Crow segregationist agenda. In Birmingham, racial zoning laws created an invisible line that divided Black and white neighborhoods. And once a federal appeals court struck down Birmingham's racial zoning laws, white residents and city officials sought to replace the invisible dividing lines with physical ones, and they turned to the highway. Similar things happened in Atlanta. And in Indianapolis, the city government and private actors had underinvested in Black communities that had been redlined. And then they used the challenges that those communities face as a reason to justify their further devastation by building highways through those redlined communities. And that really is just the tip of the iceberg. In states around the country, there are stories about the way that a highway was driven through a Black community. A highway was built around a Black community to contain Black people. And the result was economic disinvestment, loss of homes, loss of businesses, and loss of community institutions that really tore at the fabric of those communities.
Under the guise of eminent domain, which is always questionable and subjective.
Absolutely. Using eminent domain as an excuse and a tool to seize Black homes and Black property and to build those highways through those homes and that property, and not providing assistance with relocation, not providing adequate compensation for the loss of what was, for many people, their most valuable asset, and then aiding further segregation because the people who lost their homes and communities were forced to resettle in already deeply segregated communities.
Another note about Cynthia Wiggins, the young Black mother who died crossing a highway because the upscale mall wanted to prevent crime by not letting city buses in the lot. The late civil rights lawyer Johnny Cochran handled the case. The family agreed to a $2.5 million settlement from the mall and the bus company, money used for a trust for Cynthia's young son. After an NAACP fight, city buses were able to go into the parking lot of the upscale Walden Galleria Mall.
So ultimately, Dividing Lines is a book about how adaptive, creative, and resilient racism is. Those who love yesterday will always fight against tomorrow, and they're good at it. And this book is a story about how we have allowed racism to adapt and evolve in our transportation infrastructure to help white communities fight against tomorrow.
The book, Dividing Lines, How Transportation Infrastructure Reinforces Racial Inequality. Get the book on pre-order at www.norton.com. Oh, Deborah Archer wears another hat. She is also the president of the American Civil Liberties Union. That sound? That's President Trump signing yet another executive order. On the next Blackland, what we're seeing in plain sight and what the ACLU is doing about it.
Well, I think what most people is seeing is the destruction of our democracy and really the destruction of the infrastructure of civil rights and equality. There has been a flurry of executive orders and other actions that are challenging so many of the pieces of our communities and our government that have helped bring us to a place where we are more equitable, more inclusive, and more free, honestly.
I'm Vanessa Tyler. Join me next time. A new episode of Blackland drops every week.